They say the widow clawed her way out.
The past has whispered its secrets tonight. Subscribe, tap the bell, and comment below so you don't miss the next chilling truth time tried to bury. Prologue. The weight of silence. What if silence itself could accuse? What if the hush of a winter night carried not peace, but judgment weighing heavy as gravestone upon the conscience of the living? The year is 1819, and February's bitter cold penetrates more than flesh. It seeps into the very soul of Yorkshire. The ground lies frozen beneath 2 feet of snow, each strike of the gravedigger's shovel sending up a metallic ring that echoes to the ancient churchyard of St. Bartholomew's. The sound reverberates against weathered headstones, some so old their inscriptions have been worn smooth by wind and time, leaving only faint impressions of names that once mattered to someone. A bell tolls in the distance, not the joyous peal of Sunday morning, nor the solemn knell of natural death, but something heavier, more ominous. Its bronze voice carries across the frozen fields with the weight of judgment itself, each note hanging in the crystalline air longer than physics should allow. Dogs bay at the edge of the wrought iron cemetery gates, their howls rising and falling in harmonies that seem to mourn something the human ear cannot quite understand. And there, at the center of this midnight tableau, a coffin descends into the earth, not with the reverence due to the departed, but with the urgency of men desperate to hide their crime. Chapter 1. The Living Grave. Within that narrow pine chamber, beneath the hastily nailed lid, a heart still beats. Margaret Blackwood presses her palms against the ruffle above her face, her breath coming in short, panic gasps that consume what little oxygen remains in her wooden prison. Each exhalation steams against the chilled interior, condensing and freezing in droplets that will become her final tears. Above her, soil begins to fall. The sound is methodical, almost ritualistic. Thud, scrape, thud. Each spade of earth muffles her cries a little more. Each shovelful of frozen dirt, another sentence in her burial alive. Her voice, once strong enough to command servants and challenge the vicar's sermons, is reduced to whispers, then to nothing at all. The family stands above in a semicircle of dark coats and darker intentions. Their faces, illuminated by wavering candlelight, are masks of false solemnity. They speak in hushed tones of mercy, of necessity, of the burden she had become. But their eyes betray something far colder than the February night. Greed wrapped in the black crepe of mourning, hatred dressed in the clothing of kinship. Edmund Blackwood, her brother-in-law, supervises the grim work with the efficiency of a man conducting business. His wife, Catherine, Margaret's own sister, clutches a handkerchief to her face, though whether to hide tears or guilt, none can say. The younger Blackwood men, nephews who once played at her knee, stand silent as monuments, their boyhood affection buried deep in the coffin they now watch disappear beneath the earth. Chapter 2. The Making of a Victim. To understand the horror of that February night, one must first understand Margaret Thornfield Blackwood. Not as victim, but as she had been in life. Formidable, intelligent, and dangerously independent for a woman of her time. Born Margaret Thornfield in 1774, she was the daughter of a prosperous wool merchant whose trade routes stretched from Yorkshire to the continent. Her laughter had been as bright as church bells on Easter morning, her spirit as uncontainable as spring water breaking through winter ice. She possessed what her contemporaries called a masculine intelligence, the ability to discuss politics, literature, and commerce with an acuity that both impressed and unsettled those who encountered her. Marriage to Jonathan Blackwood in 1798 had transformed her from person to property, as it did for all women of her station. She brought to the union a dowry that included 3 mills, 200 acres of fertile land, and considerable wealth in government bonds. For 15 years, she had played her expected role: gracious hostess, devoted wife, silent partner in her husband's rise to prominence as a barrister and local magistrate. The couple had suffered the loss of 2 children in infancy during the fever outbreak of 1810. Margaret channeled her frustrated maternal instincts into managing the estate with an efficiency that made her husband's colleagues envious and increasingly dependent on her judgment. Jonathan's sudden death from apoplexy in 1813 had transformed her overnight from wife to widow, and in the harsh mathematics of early 19th century English law, That transformation stripped her of nearly every right she had possessed. The property she had brought to marriage did not revert to her control, but passed under the supervision of her late husband's male relatives. Still, Margaret retained some independence. As a childless widow, she could not be completely disinherited. Jonathan's will granted her use of Blackwood Manor and a substantial annual income. For 6 years, she lived quietly, fulfilling society's expectation that widows should fade gracefully into the background. But Margaret Thornfield Blackwood had never been one to fade gracefully. Chapter 3. The Tightening Noose. Her 40-room Georgian manor had become both sanctuary and prison. The corridors whisper with memories of better times. Dinner parties where her wit sparkled brighter than crystal. Afternoons in conservatory tending exotic plants with care she had hoped to lavish on children. Evenings by the fire where she and Jonathan read novels and debated parliamentary reforms. Now those same corridors echoed with different whispers, hushed conversations of relatives who thought themselves beyond her hearing, sibilant discussions of inheritances, and the inconvenient longevity of widows who refused to remarry or relocate to more modest accommodations. Margaret understood perfectly that her continued residence at Blackwood Manor impeded her in-laws' financial plans. Edmund had made increasingly pointed suggestions about the advantages of Bath or Brighton for a woman of her years. Her sister Catherine had grown cold and distant, their childhood intimacy replaced by formal politeness that felt more cutting than outright hostility. But Margaret's refusal to submit gracefully had sealed her fate. She began asserting her legal rights with aggressiveness that shocked relatives and scandalized neighbors. She consulted solicitors about her husband's will, questioned property management, demanded detailed accountings of income rightfully hers. Worse still, she spoke openly of her intentions. At dinner parties, she mentioned plans to travel to Italy, unchaperoned, a scandal that would reflect poorly on the Blackwood family's ability to control their womenfolk. She spoke of endowing a school for girls, a progressive notion suggesting dangerous independent thinking. Most damning, she had begun entertaining the attentions of Dr. William Hartwell, the village physician, whose interest was clearly more than medical. The prospect of Margaret's remarriage galvanized the Blackwood family into action. If she wed again, control of her property would pass to her new husband, removing it forever from their influence. If she remained unmarried but continued living independently, she might outlive them all, preventing the estate consolidation they had come to consider their inheritance by right. Chapter 4. The Conspiracy Unfolds. The solution they devised is elegant in its simplicity and monstrous in its execution. Margaret had always been prone to melancholy, what widow was not, and winter isolation seemed to deepen her moods. It would not be difficult to convince neighbors that grief had finally overcome reason, that the poor woman had succumbed to madness that sometimes afflicted those unable to accept their losses. The conspiracy unfolded gradually, like a noose tightening thread by thread. Small cruelties escalated into calculated malice. Medication prescribed by a doctor in Edmund's pay, food prepared by servants selected for loyalty to the family purse rather than their mistress's welfare, isolation enforced by dismissing Margaret's personal staff and replacing them with Edmund's creatures. Margaret's journal, discovered years later hidden behind a loose stone in the manor's wine cellar, revealed the progression of her growing desperation. Her handwriting, once bold and confident, became increasingly erratic as medications clouded her thinking and weakened her physical coordination. December 15th, 1818, the new cook has a heavy hand with seasoning. Everything tastes of bitter herbs and leaves me queasy. Perhaps winter affects my appetite, but I find myself longing for Mrs. Patterson's simple fare. Edmund insists Marie is superior, trained in a great London house, but I cannot help missing the familiarity of old ways. January 20th, 1819, I am certain now that something is wrong. The servants watch me with expressions I cannot interpret. Pity? Fear? Guilt? When I ask direct questions, they mumble and hurry away. Even young Thomas, who helped with the garden, now avoids my eyes. I have tried writing to Dr. Hartwell, but Edmund intercepts my correspondence, claiming he must review it for propriety, as if a widow of 45 cannot conduct her own affairs. February 1st, 1819, they mean to be rid of me. I am certain, though certainty comes and goes like fog on moors. In clearer moments, I understand I am in mortal danger. Edmund has been meeting strange men in the library. I see their shadows beneath the door and hear coins changing hands. If anything should happen to me, if this journal survives when I do not, let it testify that Margaret Thornfield Blackwood did not die naturally. The final entry, dated February 8, 1819, consisted of only a few lines in handwriting that shook violently. They have given me something stronger tonight. I can feel death creeping through my veins like winter fog, but I am not dead yet. And if they bury me alive, I swear by all holy and unholy that I should not rest quietly in their earth. The silence they seek will become their torment. What they bury will rise to accuse them. Chapter 5, The False Death. On February 9th morning, Margaret Blackwood was discovered in her bed, apparently deceased in her sleep. Dr. Morrison pronounced her dead of heart failure brought on by melancholy and general decline that often afflicted widows of a certain age. The funeral was arranged with unseemly haste. Edmund citing risk of contagion and necessity of burial before the ground froze harder. But Margaret had not died in her bed that night. The laudanum and other substances Dr. Morrison administered had merely slowed her vital functions to the point where they became undetectable to cursory examination. In her coffin, as it was loaded onto the funeral cart and transported to St. Bartholomew's churchyard, her heart continued its labored beating. The burial service was brief and sparsely attended. Weather kept most villagers indoors, and the Blackwood family discouraged social calling with whispered suggestions about the mysterious nature of Margaret's final illness. Only immediate family and a handful of longtime servants stood around the grave as the vicar spoke familiar words about dust returning to dust. But as the coffin was lowered into frozen earth, several witnesses would later swear they heard sounds that had nothing to do with settling wood or shifting soil. A scratching, they said, like fingernails against wood, a muffled thumping, as if someone were knocking from within. Dr. Morrison dismissed these claims as products of grief-stricken imaginations, but the gravediggers exchanged glances that spoke of knowledge they dared not voice aloud. Chapter 6, The Earth Refuses. The first signs of unnatural disturbance manifested within days. At Blackwood Manor, the atmosphere grew oppressive in ways defying explanation. Temperature in certain rooms dropped without cause, creating pockets of bitter cold no amount of cold could dispel. Candles flickered and died in still air. The grandfather clock, which had kept perfect time for 30 years, began chiming at irregular intervals, sometimes marking hours that did not exist, sometimes falling silent when it should have struck. Servants, already uneasy about their complicity, began reporting disturbing incidents. Footsteps echoed through empty corridors at all hours. Doors securely locked were found standing open come morning. Most unsettling, Margaret's personal effects, items packed away immediately after her death, began reappearing in accustomed places. Her favorite shawl draped across her reading chair, her spectacles on the writing desk, her prayer book lying open on the mantelpiece. Pages turned to passages about resurrection and divine justice. Edmund attempted rational explanations. Draft could explain cold spots. Settling timbers accounted for mysterious sounds. Absent-minded servants were responsible for displaced objects, but his confidence eroded with each passing night, and his attempts to impose household order grew increasingly desperate. Chapter 7, The Journal's Testimony. The discovery of Margaret's journal changed everything. It appeared one morning on the breakfast table, its leather binding stained with soil and moisture, bearing the unmistakable scent of the grave. No one could explain how it came to be there. Servants swore they had never seen it before, and Edmund was certain he conducted a thorough search of Margaret's possessions. But there it was, open to the final entry, its accusations written in Margaret's unmistakable hand. As word of the journal's contents spread to the household and beyond, the Blackwood family found themselves subjects of whispered speculation that quickly escalated into open suspicion. Dr. Morrison was first to break under pressure. Within a week of the journal's appearance, he confessed his role in Margaret's murder to the local magistrate, claiming the dead woman's spirit gave him no peace. He described nights of sleepless terror, haunted by visions of Margaret's face contorted in suffocation's agony, her eyes accusing him of betraying his medical oath. Edmund and Catherine maintained their innocence longer, but their resistance crumbled as manifestations at Blackwood Manor grew more violent and undeniable. Objects flew through rooms with no one to throw them. Temperature in Margaret's former bedroom dropped so precipitously that frost formed on windows even in April. Most damning, witnesses began reporting sightings of Margaret herself, a pale figure in burial shroud, hair hanging lank with grave dirt, eyes burning with inner fire that seemed to illuminate her entire form. Chapter 8. The Bell's Accusation. The bell at St. Bartholomew's began tolling at midnight every night, though the sexton swore he had locked the tower and hidden the key. The sound carried for miles across countryside, a bronze voice crying for justice that could no longer be denied or ignored. One by one, those who participated in Margaret's murder met their reckoning. Dr. Morrison died raving in a madhouse, his final words a continuous plea for Margaret's forgiveness. The grave diggers who'd been paid to work in haste both perished in accidents defying explanation. One crushed beneath a falling tombstone that had stood secure for a century, another drowned in a grave containing less than 2 feet of water. Edmund Blackwood lasted until autumn, before guilt drove him to public confession. Standing before the same altar where he had once taken communion with the woman he helped murder, he detailed every aspect of the conspiracy to a congregation listening in horrified silence. He died that same night, found in his study with no apparent cause save complete stoppage of his heart. Catherine survived her husband by mere weeks before joining him in whatever judgment awaited those who had betrayed family bonds for financial gain. The servants who participated in the deception fled the countryside, but their attempt to escape proved futile. Margaret's justice, it seemed, recognized no boundaries of distance or time. Epilogue. The Eternal Return. By winter's return, Blackwood Manor stood empty, its windows boarded, its grounds overgrown. No one would purchase the property, or even accept it as a gift. The very air around the house felt charged with malevolent energy, and those who ventured too close reported hearing sounds within. Footsteps, voices, the rustle of burial shrouds dragging across wooden floors. The grave at St. Bartholomew's had been opened by judicial order, revealing a coffin whose interior bore unmistakable marks of desperate struggle. Scratches gouged the wood where fingernails had clawed for escape. The lid showed signs of repeated impact from within. But the coffin itself was empty, Margaret's body nowhere to be found despite the fact that the grave had been sealed and undisturbed since burial. What remains of Margaret Blackwood now transcends the merely physical. Her story became a legend spreading far beyond her Yorkshire village, carried by fleeing servants and witnesses to supernatural manifestations. In drawing rooms across England, her tale was whispered as both warning and inspiration, a reminder that even death could not silence a woman determined to speak truth to power. The bell at St. Bartholomew's still tolls at midnight, though the church itself burned in 1823 under circumstances authorities declined to investigate. Visitors to the ruins report hearing that bronze voice even now, calling across more than 2 centuries where the message time has not diminished. That silence imposed by force will ultimately become its own accusation, that truth buried alive will claw its way back to the light, and that the earth itself sometimes refuses to keep the secrets men would hide within it. Children still dare each other to walk past the overgrown ruins of Blackwood Manor on winter nights, though few complete the journey. Those who do return with stories of a woman in white standing at broken windows, her face peaceful, but her presence absolutely commanding. She does not threaten or pursue. She simply watches, as if keeping vigil over a justice that required her death to achieve, but her resurrection to complete. Margaret Thornfield Blackwood had been buried alive by those who should have protected her, silenced by those who should have given her voice, betrayed by those bound to her by blood and law. But the earth that was meant to hide her crime became instead the foundation of her victory. The silence that was supposed to end her testimony became the most powerful accusation of all. In the end, she had proven that some truths are too vital to remain buried, some voices too insistent to be permanently stilled. Her family had sought to inherit her property by destroying her person, but instead they had created something far more valuable and infinitely more dangerous, a legend that would outlive them all. A story reminding future generations that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that the grave itself sometimes serves not as an ending, but as a beginning. The widow who returned in 1819 had taught the world a lesson that echoes still, that silence, when imposed by violence, becomes its own form of speech, and that the earth remembers everything, even when men choose to forget.